is James, and I'd like to welcome you to part 9 of my ongoing series where I'm sharing about my personal study and practice of cartomancy with playing cards. Over the last few installments, we've been talking about my personal meanings that I have for the cards, and in the last installment, I talked about the 7 cards. So if you tuned into that installment, you may remember that I talked about the 7, the number 7, in terms of a theme for all the cards, and then I shared my personal meanings and associations for the number 7, and then I talked about each of the 7 cards and my meanings for those cards. If you haven't checked out that installment, I will be leaving a link in the description box below to not only that installment, but all the previous installments before that one. So in this installment, we're going to pick up right where we left off. So now we're going to move from the number 7 to the number 8. And in the next segment, I'll be talking about the theme for all the 8 cards when it comes to the number 8. And I'll be talking once again about any kind of meanings and associations I have for the number as well. And then we'll move from that segment to the next segment where we'll be taking a closer look at all the 8 cards, and I'll be sharing what they mean for me. The deck that has been assisting me throughout this video series is the Tally-Ho playing card, specifically number 13 in the series. And I like that one because it was designed by Jackson Robinson of King's Wild Project. So now that I've set things up, let's move into the next segment where we'll be taking a closer look at the number 8 in terms of its theme for the cards and my meanings and associations. And here we are with the 8 cards in the deck, and there are 2 immediate themes that come to mind when I turn up an 8 card, and those are power and money. So those 2 things represent the themes of empowerment and abundance. In cartomancy, the 8 represents the theme of either balance or imbalance. The 8 is a business number for me, so with that in mind, it can represent business, career, entrepreneurship, because the 8 also represents the entrepreneur. And it's also known as a number of organization. So that could be organization in 1 or 2 ways. It could be organization in the business sense, meaning a company, corporation, that kind of organization, or that we're putting work and effort into becoming more organized. And that's a nod back to the number 4, because the 4, if you remember, can represent structure, discipline, work, hard work, and effort. The 8 is also a number of justice. So we have the theme here of justice and equilibrium. And if we combine the aspect of justice and balance, then we have this idea of balancing the scales. Now, some pop culture associations or phrases that I have around the number 8 are 8 Ways to Sunday, Figure 8, the 8 ball, and I'm thinking of the 8 ball that you shake up and you look at for quick little predictions. And then there's V8, the vegetable juice. I could have had a V8. And now turning to the more spiritual side of the number 8, I tend to think of the Eightfold Path, which is a nod to Zen Buddhism. And there are 3 shapes that are associated with the number 8. The first is the octagon. And the most common way you will see that shape here in the United States where I'm at is our stop signs. That is the shape of an octagon. Then there's the octagram, which is an 8-pointed star. And then the last shape or symbol with the number 8 is the infinity symbol if you turn the 8 on its side. So with that in mind, the 8 can also represent infinity and eternity. And those are my associations for the number 8. And so now let's move on to the next segment where we'll take a closer look at the cards, starting with the 8 of Hearts. And here we are with our first 8 card, the 8 of Hearts. And so for me, the 8 of Hearts can mean mutual love and admiration if we go with the idea that the suit of hearts can represent feelings, emotions, love, and healing. So those are all my associations for the suit of hearts. So again, mutual love and admiration. This card can also represent a very good friend, a blonde woman, and that's more of a traditional meaning, or a loved one. Now, if we combine the 8 representing power and the suit of hearts representing love, then we have the power of love, powerful feelings and or emotions, and the power to heal. Remember, the hearts is the suit for me that can represent healing. And so when I talk about the power to heal, it represents strength. Now, we talked about the 8 representing justice, so the 8 of hearts in particular can represent justice, equality, if you go with the idea about equality in our relationships, harmony, and balance. Now, if the Ace of Hearts turns up in a reading, and we're talking about the home, because now remember, the Ace of Hearts represents home and family, then this card, in connection to that, would represent the living room. Now, going with the spiritual aspect of this card, for me, the 8 of Hearts can represent a guardian angel. And if you're not into angels, then the 8 of Hearts can represent this idea or this sense of being watched over and or protected. Now, if you are more spiritually minded, the 8 of Hearts can represent faith and trust in the infinite. Remember, 8 representing infinity and eternity. And then the last thing that I want to say about the 8 of Hearts, it brings to mind this phrase, love springs eternal. And so now let's move on to the next 8 card in this video, the 8 of Clubs. And here we have the 8 of Clubs, and for me, the 8 of Clubs is the work and or business card. So when this card turns up, it's talking about the type of work that you do. The 8 of Clubs also represents conversations, so it can represent lots of discussions, conferences, meetings, going with the business aspect of the suit of clubs. Now, because the suit of clubs can also represent one's social life or social activity, the 8 of Clubs can represent your daily life, your everyday environment and surroundings, your everyday activities, because now remember, the suit of clubs is also about action. So this would just be, if you're not out in the world working, let's say, then this would just be the work that you're doing in your everyday life. Now, bringing this back to the work and business aspect of the suit of clubs, this card can represent an offer of work or a change of jobs, much like the 5 of Clubs that we talked about in a previous video. Now, I talked about the 8 representing organization, so this is the card that would represent that. Again, keeping with the idea about business. So this could be organization in the business sense, or like I talked about in terms of clubs representing action, then the action of getting your life organized. And that will do it for the 8 of Clubs. Now let's shift gears and take a look at the next 8 card, the 8 of Diamonds. And here we are with our third of the 4 8 cards, and this is the 8 of Diamonds. And so for me, the chief meaning of this card when it turns up, it represents money. But more specifically, I think of things like budgeting. So this can represent keeping a budget, coming up with a budget. It can also represent bookkeeping along those same lines, and accounting. Anything having to do with financial records or record keeping. Now, still sticking with the monetary and financial aspect of the 8 of Diamonds, it can also represent saving for the future and planning for the future. And going with the money aspect of the 8 of Diamonds, it can also represent our resources. Money is a resource. But it can also represent our sense of resourcefulness. Now, because the suit of Diamonds represents the physical and the material, for me, the 8 of Diamonds represents the eyes. So with that, you could think of things like glasses and spectacles. And so with the idea about spectacles, it can also be an experience or a situation that's like a spectacle, right? Something that you have to view or watch. And keeping with the eyes aspect of this card, it can also represent observation and or monitoring a situation. The 8 of Diamonds can represent being insightful, still playing with the eyes and the idea about sight or vision or perception. It can represent being insightful and looking into the future. And so that could be looking into the future in the planning sense, but also looking into the future maybe on an intuitive or psychic level, because the suit of diamonds can represent psychic energy. So this would be a nod to maybe clairvoyance. And then the last thing that I want to say about the Eight of Diamonds, this could represent working with mathematics. And so now let's move on to the final card for this video, the Eight of Spades. And here we are with the last card for this video installment and the last 8 card in the deck, and this is the Eight of Spades. Now my first go-to meaning for this card when it turns up in a reading, I think of investigation. And so that could be investigation in the legal sense, because remember, the 8 is a number of justice. But I also look at it in terms of research or analysis, because the suit of spades can also represent the mind and mental activity. So when I think of investigation in that regard, it's the idea of looking into something further. The Eight of Spades can also represent examination. So if we go with the mind with the suit of spades, and this could be like a testing or an exam, something having to do with learning, but it can also be examination in the physical sense, because this card can also represent illness and sickness, much like the Four of Spades that we talked about in an earlier video. So with that in mind, the Eight of Spades can represent a visit to the doctor or to the dentist, keeping with the idea that the suit of spades can represent the mind, which is in the head, so therefore it can also represent the mouth, which is why we get the dentist in here. And so still playing on the idea of visiting a doctor, 2 types of doctors besides a dentist this card is associated with is a psychologist or a psychiatrist. If we go with the idea that the number 8 represents power, and the suit of spades represents the mind, and this could represent a strong mind. And with that, I'm thinking about the intellect. And this card can also represent the power of our thoughts and our words. Now, I talked about this idea earlier when I mentioned investigation in the legal sense. So the Eight of Spades can also represent legal difficulties or a sense of injustice, because spades represents problems, challenges, blocks, or obstacles. So I think of injustice and the idea of being treated unfairly. Now, if we go with the idea that the 8 represents business or career, then the Eight of Spades can represent business and or career struggles. If we go with the idea that the 8 is talking about abundance or money, then this could also represent financial problems or challenges. And because the suit of spades can represent blocks, this card can also represent blocks to abundance and or prosperity. And then the last thing that I want to say about this card is that an old traditional meaning of the Eight of Spades is prison. So if it's not prison in the legal sense, in the literal sense, then this could be the sense of, the idea of, feeling trapped, restricted, or held back in some way. And that will wrap up taking a look at the 8 cards. And there you have it. We talked about the number 8 and the themes and associations I have for it, and the meanings I have and use for the 8 cards. And that will bring this video installment to a close. In the next installment, we'll take a look at the number 9 and all the 9 cards. I'm James Himm Mitchell, and I'd like to thank you for sharing this space here with me, and I look forward to being with you again in our next video together. So until then, I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.